So today I'm going to discuss the intersection of food supply chains and the social relationships that we form through them, and how these relationships in turn influence farming and land use regulation. So as Dr. Matlock pointed out, about 43% of the land is in agriculture. We govern what stays in agriculture through land use regulations. Just as these past decades have seen us join professional networks and social platforms that showcase our connections transparently, my pitch for the future of farming is that it doesn't stop with Know Your Farmer, but Know Your Food Network. And this is especially true for educators who want to improve communication across the food system, and for communities who really want to get together and think about the future. Are they going to keep agriculture, or are they going to develop more housing, for example? Chief Mann and Provost Pitchett's life work really shows how land use planning can be implemented without equity or with equity. Similarly, Secretary Redding noted that the future of farming is going to be equal parts science and civics, and then he urged us to use every ounce of science. I am urging us to use every ounce of civic engagement as well to keep agriculture. To start, I also want to take a moment to acknowledge what feels like complete chaos. We're in a pandemic, maybe not even the middle of the pandemic. There is civil unrest, police brutality, potentially looming economic recession, unemployment, food security rising, contentious elections, lack of affordable housing. And sadly, we have been at these inflection points before. I ran across this image of 1850s New York when I was doing archival work on pandemics and land use planning regulations to understand how cities have engineered themselves out of it. This sketch depicts a point in time when there was a cholera outbreak and New York had no sanitation services. Irish immigrants used pigs to process the city's slops. The city smelled terrible, and the police were told to go in, confiscate livestock, burn the houses down. And then planners were brought in to design Central Park and clean water supply and the nation's first great aqueduct system, which ultimately put an end to cholera. So this history is to show that while we didn't get the responses completely right, we have a lot to learn and relearn, and that health crises offer a stress test for how reliable and safe our food supply is. And this pandemic is no different in that respect. The disease has animal origins, and we're struggling with exactly how to manage cities and food supply. As it was mentioned, my background is in veterinary medicine, and I have a master's in virology, the study of viruses, so I feel very comfortable talking about this topic. I realize that the laws that shape that interface between urban areas and agriculture are governed by land use planning. And I was fortunate enough to be at Penn, so I was able to pursue my BMD and my PhD in planning at the same time. Where in the world can you do that except for Penn? Penn has this unique strength in bringing cross-disciplinary thinking to real-world problems. And it is that diversity of expertise that we need right now. So I can't think of a better place to have the conversation we're starting today. I also want to point out that Philadelphia and Pennsylvania has been a testing ground for innovation in the food system for a long time, well before this moment. I also want to point out that before COVID, there were high rates of diet-related diseases like obesity and diabetes, and poverty, which leads to food insecurity. Recognizing this, a Philly-based nonprofit, the Food Trust, initiated a study on grocery stores, and then they also initiated a funding platform across the state, implemented numerous grocery stores. Their work was so inspiring that then First Lady Michelle Obama's Get Healthy program was modeled after it, and the federal government invested over $50 million across the country. This is a map that shows where grocery stores have been implemented to try and serve underserved communities. So again, if there's going to be a demonstration of the farming of the future, Pennsylvania has a history of innovating in the food system. So today I'm going to talk about supply chains. And as I mentioned before, COVID has been a stress test. There have been outbreaks of COVID in meatpacking plants that have led to shortages as essential workers fall ill. You've probably noticed that grocery store shelves are empty or items are rationed. And there's also, for a very long time, been problems with ownership in the food system, a bottleneck in control over distribution and pricing. So for example, about 4 firms control 85% of the beef market. These farms contract with farmers to grow in a very specific way, and then they set the pricing and the packaging for the way that food is sold. If we take a network-based perspective, we can see why such a streamlined supply chain can be fragile. And this is why economists and supply chain experts are pointing out that we need a more distributed supply chain. Food supply is day to day, and it can be broken. So I mentioned COVID and packing plants, but it can also be broken when there's E. coli contamination, for example, at a distributor. Or, for example, there have been fewer flights from Mexico, so there's less produce that is flown into the country. This red dot on the PowerPoint represents contamination at a main plant and a main plant going offline. So you can see how disruption in just a few key spots in a centralized system is propagated and then has ramifications across the food system, especially in a streamlined food system. COVID's been a stress test, and the streamlined food supply system has done a very decent job in restocking shelves, but the entire market has been impacted. Let me say too that the US has incredible purchasing power. So the storm that destroyed millions of acres of corn and soy in the Midwest is going to lead to shortages, and countries like the US that have purchasing power may not feel the ill effects of that, but other countries without the purchasing power will feel the consequences. And then there are, of course, political consequences when there's widespread hunger. So shifting from this global view, today I want to focus on a more distributed food supply chain. This is made up largely of smaller scale farmers who are very actively involved in land use policy at the local level, and land use policy is set at that local level where you speak with your city and your county and you create a land use plan which decides what stays in agriculture and what gets developed. These smaller farmers, as Dr. Matlock pointed out, tend to be focusing on organic and agroecological and animal welfare. They're really pushing the boundaries. They're offering proof of concept. Oftentimes they can get double the value in their production because they tend to offer value-added products. And the farms are also known entities and supported by local campaigns. I want to be very clear at this point that each system, distributed and streamlined, has benefits and drawbacks. They are not oppositional. There's no dichotomy. Both can coexist, and there are benefits when they do. So now let me tell you about Chester County, which is where we'd all be sitting at New Bolton Large Animal Center. And my argument is that we could plug in more to this network of local growers and strengthen partnerships to demonstrate smart farming for the future. I work with ag extension faculty at UC Davis who do just that. They map the network of local farms to identify hubs so that they can rapidly get out information if, for example, there's an outbreak, but also if, for example, there's a new technique, or if, for example, there's a new land use plan that's coming online and people need to mobilize to think about farmland preservation. So this is what agriculture looks like in Chester County. Ag is a significant driver of the economy. There are 1,700 farms, and about 10% of them do direct sale to consumers. Mushrooms are very popular. There's a mushroom festival, which is wonderful. The fastest growing segment of agriculture in Chester County is organic production. And the speckled colors on the map show various different forms of production. So the information that I'm going to present now is data that's gathered on farms and their first point of sale or donation. We gathered only data on fresh, unprocessed food, So no value added products. This is an underestimate of what the local food system looks like in Chester County, but I'm now going to show you the network of food supply in Chester County. This network consists of 1,000 connections between over 100 farms and 600 different markets. And there's a lot that can be learned from looking at this from a network perspective. I'm not going to get too nerdy with social network analysis, but some general trends are that most of the sales and donations typically occur no more than an hour away, because that's the distance that people are willing to travel, farmers or consumers. Also, most of the network is made up of sales to intermediaries like grocery stores or restaurants. And typically the USDA notes that about 2/3 of local sales occur through intermediaries. These are really important institutions in local food. But this network also includes school gardens, farms that are further away that then sell into the Chester County, so that when you go pick your apples or your pumpkins, you can buy their products as well and engage in agritourism. So let me blow this network up and show it to you from a social perspective as opposed to the spatial perspective, because it's a bit messy at the spatial level. When we take this social view, we put the farms and the markets that are most central to the network in the center of the network. And you can see that there is nothing hourglass shaped about this network. It is messy and it is interwoven. And that is an indication that power is very shared in this food system. I want to point out that there tends to be specializing in types of marketing. So I've circled a farm here that sells primarily to through wholesale, through grocery stores, but there's also diversity. So this farm also sells to a farmer's market. And we've seen this in many other counties where farms tend to specialize in a type of marketing, but they also add in a little bit of diversity. This is really important because during the pandemic, we saw breakdowns in national supply chains. And I moderated a discussion last month, one of the many months of March, where we spoke with Raley's grocery store and others, and they were noting that their regional suppliers were able to step up a little bit more. And that is likely because they have a diversity in the way that they market. And so if there's a breakdown in one marketing typology, they can shift and fill that contract. This diversity also offers a stepping stone. So a farm may start at a farmer's market, gain a lot of dedicated clients, then start a CSA, meet a chef, start selling through contracts to a restaurant, then many restaurants, and then get their product taken up through wholesale. And that pathway to scale up is not always there in the same way for larger scale, for the streamlined food system. Another piece that I really want to highlight that I think is amazing about Chester County's food supply network is that the node that is most central to the network, the node that, if you think of the network as paths that you have to travel through, and there's one spot that you have to go through to get to any other spot, that location at the center of Chester County's food system is the food bank. The food bank is a convener of farms. They have a fleet of 2,000 volunteers that go out and glean leftover food that's left in the field. They introduce new farmers to markets. They offer taste testing at schools. They operate a whole bunch of different gardens where they are quite literally growing the future of farming by educating children about agriculture and introducing them to food. And the work that they do, I think, really is a testimony to the leadership and their executive director, Larry Welsh, but also to the central role that food security has in Chester County's local food system. And this is, of course, very different from a more streamlined approach. So the local food network is small, but it is very engaged. And you can see an example of this when you look at the land use plan in Chester County. It is no accident that the land use plan encourages people to get involved with the food bank, because the food bank is very involved in local agriculture. It, in fact, is the centerpiece. But the other thing that I want to point out is that a lot of the farms and the markets who are involved in the local food system have also been very strong advocates for farmland preservation. And Chester County has an open space preservation program that began in the late 80s. 30% of the land, that the farmland is, of the open space, is preserved. And this is really a testament to the coordinated effort by county leadership, municipalities, nonprofit, and supportive citizens. So while local food is a small percentage of the market, it's a very visible spot when you start to think about keeping land and farming instead of developing it. And for the non-planners in the room, when you buy land, there's a parcel of rights. So you could sell the oil underneath, but you could also sell the development rights, the ability to develop. And that's what farmland preservation is. It's providing farmers with money to not develop. And you can do that on a lease basis or a sale of the development rights basis. My future research is mapping these very same local food networks across 100 counties to predict networks to model their evolution. We resampled Chester County just this last year. The food bank is still the center. So they are still the hub around which local food is organizing. I encourage you all to think of the local food system as a social platform, the way that you might think of Facebook or Twitter, as a place to convene, to organize, to influence change, to talk about labor and agriculture, to talk about climate and agriculture, to talk about animal welfare. So it's not just know your farmer, but I think this is another really great example of know your cow, know your network. Milky Way Farm operates the Chester Springs Creamery, where you can see the cows from the ice cream parlor. And they have 48 flavors, each of them named after one of the cows. So if you leave this talk thinking only that the social scientist told you to eat ice cream in order to preserve farmland, I'm going to be happy enough. Thank you.